we had an opportunity today to introduce the Zero Waste Act. And I know that you have been one of the organizations, you work for one of the organizations that helped us craft this bill. Can you introduce yourself, tell the folks who are tuning in what your organization does and why you think this bill is an important bill?
Sure, that's a lot. So I'm Denise Patel. I work at the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. We're a global network of organizations, mostly community groups, frontline folks who live really at the intersection of where our waste streams end up. So it's a lot of communities that are impacted by incinerators, landfills, and have been traditionally exposed to a lot of the toxic air emissions that come from incinerators, as well as the air and water pollution that comes from our landfills. Right. We're a community of organizations that works towards achieving zero waste solutions, both in our individual communities, but then we also in the U.S. work on state policy and federal policy, so we were really excited about the introduction of the Zero Waste Act. For us, it's going to be a critical piece of resources that will be available to both cities and communities that are aiming to move towards zero waste solutions. So we were really excited to share that with our members and let folks know about it, and especially to be able to speak to you and your staff about some of the things that we think will be most critical in getting those resources to the folks who are really at the front lines of the zero waste economy and the zero waste transition. So one of the framings I was super excited about is the Green New Deal.
Yeah.
We know that the waste stream is not only a source of toxic pollution, but also a source of greenhouse gas emissions through landfills, through incinerators, and the entire framing of the Green New Deal is about a just transition that's community-led. It guarantees living wages for workers, and that could be a huge boon to the communities that are moving to develop zero waste programs in their communities.
So when we're thinking about creating federal policies like this, we often, my colleague and one of my sisters here, Ayana, says those who are closest to the pain need to be closest to the solution. And so tell us a little bit about who is impacted and who will benefit from these policy change.
Sure. So one of the things that we know is that there are about 72, 73 incinerators across the U.S. 80% of those are in low-income communities and communities of color. They've been traditionally either placed there intentionally or have been the source of driving down markets to the point where those are the folks who can't afford to live there. And so there's been, over the past few decades, a concentration of both policies within local governments and economic conditions that have led to this. And so one of the things that we actually have been working on from our very beginning, we are looking for incinerator alternatives, is fighting incinerators, because we know that they're some of the most toxic facilities in every community. They add to the cumulative burden of toxic exposures that has led to increased rates of asthma, cardiovascular disease, cancer amongst the populations that live around them. And so by moving towards zero waste, we actually would be taking away supply from incinerators, right? So if we're moving towards a system where we're doing reduction of waste and then reuse, and then finally recycling of things that are actually recyclable, we are able to take away that supply from those incinerators, and that adds to our ability to actually shut them down. Yeah.
So when people hear that we are interested in boldly addressing our climate crisis, what they hear is that we are going to get rid of jobs that have traditionally been in their communities without having a plan to replace and replenish that job market. And so with a proposal like zero waste, how would it address that sort of anxiety?
Well, I think there's two really important things. If we're moving towards zero waste, a lot of the solutions are local. It's developing composting systems along with urban agriculture. So not only are we removing a lot of that bio waste, but we're actually building small farms and agriculture within our own communities. So healthy food is accessible to people who haven't had it before or have had a hard time accessing it because there are food deserts in a lot of urban areas, and especially in low-income communities. And then we're also talking about increasing how and what we recycle. And so making sure that the things that we recycle are actually recyclable, making sure that collections are done in a way that enables more recycling. One of the things that we know in the US, one of the things that Gaia works on actually is fighting against plastic pollution. Plastic pollution, as I'm sure you've seen, has proliferated everywhere. Just last year, China decided to ban all of the plastics that it was taking to recycle. And what that has meant for the US is that all of the municipalities, like when you throw your water bottle or any of your detergent containers or whatever into your single stream recycling, and it gets taken away, it was being shipped off to China, which was then recycling it, turning it into plastic pellets, sending it back to us to make new products. But they decided that too many of our plastics were contaminated or unrecyclable. And what that means for the communities here in the US is now municipalities are looking at incineration as an option. The fossil fuel industry and the plastics industry is promoting things like chemical recycling and pyrolysis, which basically means that they want to turn those plastics into fuels that we would then burn as things like, you might have seen an ad for plastic-based diesel, which is actually more polluting and adding and exacerbating to the climate crisis.
More toxins.
But we know that if we switch everything to zero waste, if we're doing waste collection properly, if we're building composting systems, and we're segregating our waste and actually sending recyclable stuff to recyclables, for folks who are in those communities, it actually creates more jobs. For every one job there is in the traditional waste management system, there's 10 jobs in advancing zero waste. And so, that sounds like a great thing.
It seems like there are, places like the city of Minneapolis who endorsed our bill, who are already advancing initiatives to get the city to be zero waste. So this isn't something that many municipalities are fighting against, right? They're in full support. They see the benefits of moving their communities along this way. But it seems like there is a problem sometimes to making it economically feasible to do so. And so what our bill really does address is to make sure funds are available so that communities who are doing the work or communities that are interested in starting the work have the resources that they need to be able to implement their initiatives. And I think that's the piece, right? Because oftentimes we could propose lofty ideas. And if we're not giving people the actual tools and the resources to implement them, then that just remains a lofty idea. And so that, I think, for me is the exciting piece. When I was in Minneapolis and worked at City Hall for Councilmember Andrew Johnson, we moved some of these initiatives and advanced what our bill is proposing, and to now get the opportunity to have them to have more resources to be able to implement those policies is I think what is exciting for them, and the reason that they 100% support this initiative. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what Congresswoman DePalin talked about today. There's a personal piece to this, right? If we can do our part, we can compost, we can recycle, we can use reusable items for our day-to-day lives, right? My daughter has a reusable straw. Alex Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has utensils that are made out of bamboo and such. There are, you know, I have my own struggles. You know, sometimes I'm walking around with a Starbucks cup and people will say, "Oh, hon, you're not doing your part."
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of guilt associated with the individual piece of this. But I think that there is a societal responsibility, and there is a responsibility that we have as policymakers to move the needle in a heavy way than just leaving it to the individual part. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the individual actions are great, but oftentimes it's really hard to take those individual actions.
Right.
And part of the reason that's so difficult is because that's the way our system is set up. And that's where federal policies, state policies, and even local policies can play a big role. If citizens are interested in moving beyond, like taking a reusable cup and your straw and your utensils, which we all try to do as best we can, they can also advocate for better policies and have an impact that way. I know a lot of folks feel guilty. Sometimes it's hard to avoid. Like I came in on the train and I was like, hey, I just wanted to grab a cup of coffee, but I left my reusable bottle at home. These things happen. And I think one of the things that that folks should be aware of is that, one, it should be on those companies to help create a system to either have like take back programs or make sure that their own products are actually recyclable. Because in reality, like only number 1 and number 2 plastics are really truly recyclable, and everything after that gets a lot harder. And so
creating incentives.
Can help, or just making those companies responsible, because right now, for every company that puts out all these single-use items, right? So all those Starbucks cups, they add up. And so we would love to see more of those companies taking responsibility for putting in place systems in their own shops that either allow people to do reuse, that kind of thing.
And I think creating the infrastructure for better sorting, getting rid of burners, like those are more, that those produce more damage to our system than, you know, the cup that you buy one day because you forgot, or you're like myself and constantly lose your reusable. And so it is truly about minimizing the greater damage that is being done to our environment, and figuring out how to create incentives and how to create pathways to a better world where we're able to sustain ourselves.
Absolutely true.
So thank you for your support, and I hope that everybody who's tuning in calls their member of Congress and asks them to support, and calls their members of their city council and their mayor and asks if you know they're implementing these initiatives and what resources do they need, and why they should endorse our policy so we can move it along.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and we thank you so much for putting the bill out. It's amazing, and I think it'll make a big difference, especially for all these cities and communities that are working towards zero waste solutions.
So we're excited. We're actually gonna announce all of our citizen co-authors soon too. We're getting people across the country to co-sponsor the bill. And I think it's an opportunity to just uplift what this would mean for everyone, and the kind of change it will create in all of our societies 10 years, 20 years